Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Shah Weekly. In this video, I like to go over what exactly is mocking in unit testing. So the idea of mock is that you are simulating the real object. So why would you ever want to do that? Why would you not just use a real object? Well, there are some conditions like your application, your test is dependent on some third parties. Maybe it's a service, maybe it's an Amazon service, maybe it's a pedometer that has to be run on a real device. And you're testing those things. You're testing either the unit test, which should run in the memory, or you're testing the UI test, just the UI portion of the test that has nothing to do with fetching data or running it on the actual device. All right. So in those cases, you can use mocking and you can mock out the third party. So let's take a look at this example. This is our very simple application. You can see that I have written a UI test, and the test simply says when the user logs in successfully, then display user information on the screen. And we are going to be writing something in the username text field, password text field. We will go ahead and click on the login button. And then if the login is successful, then on the same exact view, we have a company label and a name label, which is going to be populated with ABC Inc. for the company name and John Doe for the name. And this is actually going to make a call to a web service. So let me actually show you the web service. It is written in the Node using JavaScript. You can see nothing really interesting going on. It's simply going to return John Doe. Name is John Doe, company is ABC. So it's all hard-coded data, but we are going to invoke that. So if I go ahead and run this test, and right now, make sure that you understand that I am actually connected to the internet. I'm running my UI test, and this is actually going to go and invoke the actual service. So it is going to make an actual web request using URL session.share or whatever. And you can see that I'm writing it out and all the things, and the test actually passes. Great. So this is working. This is my UI test. Now let's see if I am maybe stepping into a plane or I am trying to run this test without internet connection. So you can see over here that I am no longer connected to the internet. So I'm going to go ahead and run the same exact test but without internet connection. All right. So let's see if this test actually passes or this test fails. So if we run the test, we're going to fill out the username and fill out the password and press the login button. And we are hoping to get back the company name, but we did not, and it actually failed. And the things that you should notice over here is that we did not get anything back. Now this is not an acceptance test. This is not an integration test. This is a UI test. So a UI test, why is it dependent on the web service or the internet? That's a bad test. It has a dependency on the web connection or the Wi-Fi connection. So that is where we will mock out that dependency. Mock out means whenever it's going to go and hit the API or the web service that is supposed to return the information like company label or company name and the user person name, we are going to mock it out, meaning we're going to give you some predefined response. So how can we do that? Well, the first thing you will notice is that this is our HTTP client, which is in our main application, which is called authenticate function, and it actually goes to the URL, a real service, and gets all that information. And the person who is using the HTTP client is the login view model. You can see over here that in order to create the login view model, we have to pass in HTTP client. So we have to overcome this step because this is a concrete implementation of HTTP client. We should be able to pass in a simulation object over here, a mocked object or a mocked service that can return a response maybe by reading a file, and that can work without the web connection, a Wi-Fi connection. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the services and I'm going to add a new file over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a protocol. So I'm going to go ahead and say over here, HTTP client protocol. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and create that. So this will be the protocol It's going to be called HTTP client protocol. If you want to create an HTTP client, then you must conform to this protocol. What kind of function we will have in this protocol? Well, I can get the name of the function actually from here. This will be the name of the function, or this will be the definition of the function. So anybody who wants to be interested in becoming the HTTP client must use this particular protocol. Let's go ahead and build that application right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the HTTP client conforms to this protocol. So we can say HTTP client protocol right here. Let's go ahead and build that. That's also working correctly. That's fine. And now we can go to login view model, and we can see that in the login view model, we are hard coding it to a concrete implementation of HTTP client. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to HTTP client protocol. So the person has to pass in HTTP client protocol. Okay, great. This means that anybody who is conforming to HTTP client protocol can be passed to a login view model. And this is our opportunity to pass in a mocked client. All right. So for the mock client, I'm going to go back to the mocked UI test because mocks are part of the test. So that's why I'm going to create the mocking objects in the test. And now we can go ahead and create our mock client. So let's go ahead and add a Swift file. And I can go ahead and say over here, mock HTTP client. So I've added a new file and I'm calling it mock HTTP client. It doesn't really have anything. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and import foundation. And since I want to use the HTTP client protocol, which is actually defined in a completely different project, I can import using testable import. So let's go ahead and say testable import, and that particular project is called Introduction to Mocking. Now I can go ahead and create my mock HTTP client. This is going to be conforming to the HTTP client protocol. That's the beauty of the mock object and creating a protocol that now we can conform to that. I'm going to go ahead and copy this function because there is only one function that I need to conform to or implement. And there we go. Great. Now, authenticate function, since we're defining it in the mock HTTP client, it will have a different definition because instead of going to the actual service, going to the Wi-Fi connection and invoking an actual JSON API, it is going to be reading it from a file, or we can hard code it if you want. Now I'm going to read from a file, and the reason I'm going to read from a file is simple because I want it to be as close to the real thing as possible. All right. So the first thing we need is some sort of a file. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go ahead and add a new group, and I can simply say over here JSON responses because it is kind of like a response that we are getting, right? So I'm calling it JSON responses. And in the JSON responses, I can add any kind of a response. So I can say over here, new file, and we're just going to add like a simple HTTP empty file is fine, I guess. And we can say authentication successful response or auth success response. That's perfectly fine. Auth success response dot JSON. And this file will have the actual successful JSON response. What does the successful JSON response looks like? Well, we have the service which is running. The actual URL, if we pass in or go to the login, it's going to return us some sort of a JSON response, which kind of looks like that. So that is something that we can go ahead and paste it. And that's the response that we are actually expecting. So I'm just pasting it over here, and that sounds about right, right? Now, inside the mock object, so mock HTTP client, we can go ahead and read that particular response file. We can also decode it and send the actual response. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we need is to get to the actual URL. So URL equals to bundle. And when you are trying to read it inside some sort of a unit testing, we have to use the for, and we have to give it some access to some sort of a file so that it knows that we are trying to read it from the unit testing bundle, and we're not trying to read it from the main bundle. So that's why I'm telling it that, well, make sure that you find the class called mock HTTP client. All right, .url, and for a particular resource. So what will be the resource? Well, in this case, the resource is auth, and then success, response, and the extension of the resource is actually JSON. There we go. Okay, now we will get some different things from over here. We are going to get a data. So data equals to data, and we are going to get contents of the URL where we can pass in the URL. Else, if this is not working, then we can go ahead and simply fire the completion block, firing it and returning nil. Okay. So instead of going to the actual URL and fetching all that information, what we are doing is we are simply using our response file, which has hard-coded response, which we know it will work. And now we can go ahead and get the actual response. So response equals to try, and we are going to perform JSON decoder dot decode, and we are going to decode it to user.self because the response that we have added that will and should map to user.self or user object, and we can pass in the actual data. This is going to return us some sort of a user, so we can just say user over here. That's fine also. There we go. Okay, and we can simply fire the completion at this point by passing in the user object. If you go and check out the user object that is actually in the original project or the main application, the user object simply is a decodable which has username, name, and company. So nothing more complicated going on over there. But you can see that how the mock HTTP client is different from the real client. So if you look at the real client, it's literally going to the URL, making the request. But the mock HTTP client we are writing is reading from a file which will always exist. So that's the difference. Now you can run this without having to connect to the internet. All right. Okay, so we have this now mock client, which is great, but how will I test, or how will we tell our test that we are using the mock HTTP client and we are not using the original client? If you go and open up content view, this is where we are actually creating the object itself. You can see on line number 16, this is actually troublesome. We are hard coding it that we'll be using the HTTP client. So how can we replace that with the mocked client? Now this is going to be a little bit more interesting because we will have to switch, meaning when we are creating a login view model, and if this code is getting invoked from the test, the UI test, then we should replace the HTTP client with the mock client. But if we are not running it from a test, then, well, it should be using the actual client, which is the HTTP client. Now, if I go ahead and over here, I can say mock HTTP client, then this is not good because this is the actual code, the actual application that you're typing. And now every time, even in the real app, it is going to be using mock HTTP client. So you can't do that. That's not good practice, right? It has to be flexible to switch itself. If you're running it from a test, then you should use the mock HTTP client. If you're running it just the app on your device on production, it should use HTTP client. But the question is, how do we make sure that it actually switches? So let's go ahead and see how we can do that. So the answer to this is that we will have to create a factory or some sort of code that can predict, that can assume that if it's running on a or through the test, then it will return a mocked HTTP client. And if it is running on a real app, then it should just return HTTP client. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new group, and I'm going to call this factories. And inside the factory, I'm going to go ahead and add a new file. Swift file is fine. And I'm going to go ahead and say HTTP client factory. You can obviously name it anything that you want, but since this particular class is responsible for creating HTTP clients, that's why I'm calling it a factory using the factory pattern. And now we can go ahead and maybe create a static function. So function static, and we can call it create. That's fine. It is going to return us something which is using HTTP client protocol. Okay. Now, a couple of different things going on over here. I think I always misplace when I'm creating the static function, so I think it should be like that. And we should be returning HTTP client protocol. Now, if I go ahead and return HTTP client over here, then it means that it is always going to return me the real HTTP client, not the mock one, and it's again going to try to invoke the web service, which we don't want. So somehow we need to check over here that if the thing is running or if the environment is UI test, then we can return something else. Now, how do we check? Well, let's go ahead and we're going to use something called the environment arguments that you can pass in. So inside your UI test, when we are running the test, we can set the environment. So app dot, and you can see over here, you can set the launch environment. And this is simply a dictionary, so you can pass anything that you want. I'm just going to pass in env, and I'm going to call it test. All right. This means that whenever we run this application, whenever we launch this application, the launch arguments or the environment will have a key called environment, and the value will be test. Now, this is fine, and this is only going to be passed when you are actually using or running it through the test. So we need to access that value right over here. So in order to access the launch environments, you can use the process info dot environment, and this is going to return you a dictionary. So let's go ahead and get that over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to go ahead and print that out. So you can see all the different launch arguments when we are using the process info, and you'll also see that there are a lot more launch arguments that are passed by default. Now we can go back to our content view, and instead of using the HTTP protocol, I'm going to now use the HTTP, the factory, and .create. So based on, well, right now it's just going to return you HTTP client, but if I run this actual app or from the actual test over here, hopefully we'll be able to see some sort of launch arguments being displayed. So, and then we'll see that if the argument, our env, is found over there, then we can go ahead and we can get that. So let's go ahead and run our test. Okay, so test is already failing for some weird reason. Well, let's go ahead and first fix that stuff. So we have a lot of errors going on over here. I don't think that is a correct error. So let's go ahead and try to find out that what exactly is going on. All right, everyone. So I tried my best, but I am not able to find the problem, and these errors, it looks like they are coming from the actual Swift compiler. For some reason, it is just throwing these weird errors. You can see over here that these errors doesn't really mean much. I mean, they're saying undefined symbol protocol descriptor for introduction to mocking HTTP protocol. But when you go to the mocked client, we are actually using the testable imports, and that is where the HTTP protocol actually lives. So it should be able to use it. In the other project that I did, I was able to use it, but something got bad for this particular project, and I definitely don't know what exactly is going on. So we're going to continue with it. Hopefully you're not going to face that problem. If you actually do face this exact problem, these kind of errors, let me actually show you right here, then try to find a solution. And if you do find the solution, let me know and I'll try to implement the update for this video. All right. Okay, so this is our mocked HTTP client, and you can see that it is reading from the JSON file, which is auth success. If I look at the JSON file, I've added it to the introduction to mocking project also, so 2 different targets, that's fine. And inside the factory, what I have done is that we are reading the environment value env, which you can see that I'm setting it right over here in the test. So env environment is test. So when it is running from the test, it's going to launch the actual app, and then we are using, if I go to the content view, we're using the, over here, so we have to use the correct one, the actual factory. So I can go ahead and say http client factory dot create, and if you jump into the create function, you can see http client factory. Is that some other thing? That's kind of weird that it actually popped out. Oh, create. So let's go to the create. Manage buffer.create. I don't know where that is coming from, unless I have created a completely different name. Maybe that's the reason. That is possible. I don't think there's anything called HTTP client factory. I mean, we can definitely check in the documentation. So let's go to the documentation, and we will check that if this particular factory or HTTP client factory, if that is something that's to be considered. So if we go to developer documentation right here, let's search for this HTTP client factory. Okay, so there's nothing like that. So that's not the issue. Okay. So inside the HTTP client factory, we're using the process info environment variable. And if the environment variable is test, then we are returning the mocked HTTP client. And if it is not, then we are returning the HTTP client. All right. But unfortunately for me, it is definitely not working. All right. So if I run the app from the test, which is from over here, if I run the test, it's completely failing. It's not even building correctly. And I personally don't know what exactly is wrong with this. The errors are not really making sense to me, that what exactly is going on. Maybe this is a bug in Swift compiler, or maybe I'm doing something wrong, but it's trying to say that, well, user has been referenced, and it doesn't really know what user is, which doesn't really make sense because we are inside this file. And I can go ahead and also import. Let's go ahead and do a testable import, and I will import the introduction to mocking project. But let's go ahead and run it now. Nope, still the same issue. You can see that in the mocked HTTP client, I'm already importing the introduction to mocking, which is our main project, but it's still not working. Hopefully it will work on your scenario, because I have a separate project that is exactly the same and it works over there. So something, either I messed up or something is just not timing out to be right, and I think it's just stuck. Maybe I made a mistake or sometime earlier, but even with cleaning the product or cleaning the build folder and removing the drive data, it's not really picking up correctly. So anytime I run the test, or if I try to run the test, it is definitely giving me these problems. So if I run the test, you'll see that's always giving me those issues. So something is going wrong. I don't know what it is. So hopefully if you find the problem, you'll let me know, and I will be able to update those things. All right. So hope you have enjoyed this video. I mean, I think 95% of the things we did will be the same. I think that 5% where you're looking at the bug, that is where we kind of messed up, and that is where I don't have the answer of why we are getting this kind of a bug every time we use the HTTP or mocked HTTP client, which is using the HTTP client protocol defined already over here. All right. So hopefully you'll let me know if you find the issue or if you find the solution, and I will update the video to reflect that part. If you want to support my channel, then the best way would be to go to Udemy and check out my many different courses. You can see that I have a course on SwiftUI, and this is a very, long course. It's a 15-hour course, so I have covered pretty much all the different scenarios that you are going to be finding out. But if you want to check out my other course, simply click on the name And you can see that I have many other courses, including a course on machine learning using artificial intelligence. That's a brand new course that has been released. And I'm also working on a course on unit testing, which is going to dive into more of unit testing. If you are looking for a course on ARKit, I have a course on ARKit, I have a course on Flutter, and you can see the course. I have a huge list of courses that I have that you can utilize. All right. So thank you so much for watching this video. And once again, if you find a solution for the problem that I was facing, I'll definitely appreciate it. I wasn't able to find anything that will fix the problem, but if you do find the problem, definitely let me know, and I will update the video to reflect that. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the video.